Alright, so cannot believe we're nearing the end of these lists, but well, because I had a pretty busy day at work and my Nintendo Switch is not downloading any DLC and the Nintendo eShop has stopped working altogether, all because I basically put my new Switch into sleep mode rather than just shutting it off altogether. So now just doing an update for a game I've already played, I have a lot of venting to give out. Now, of course, look, like any show, Friendship is Magic, I will admit, is not perfect. As much as I love the show for what it is and what it has given me, I will acknowledge the fact that the show is not perfect. In fact, it has some episodes that genuinely anger me. Angers on levels that are beyond comprehension. So, rather than doing the usual top 10 or top 15 worst list, I decided to get more. And not like the Cartoon Hero who did a top 17 list, I am doing a top 20. Because quite frankly, I have very little respect for certain episodes, and there are some that need to be talked about. Now, I want to make something very clear. This is all my personal opinion. Mine is not the end-all, be-all opinion of what I think is the worst episode of the entire show. If, for whatever reason, you like these episodes, that is perfectly okay. You are free to disagree with my opinion. These are just the episodes that anger me on multiple levels for one reason or another. So, after weighing out all the positives and negatives, let's just get into it. Here are my top 20 worst episodes of Friendship is Magic. One other rule I need to input before we begin this countdown is that I have to include at least 1 or 2 episodes from every season, or at the very least, at least 1 episode from all 9 seasons. Because if I didn't do that, the list would probably contain about half the episodes from season 8. So now let's get into it. Let's count them down. Number 20, Magic Duel. Yeah, I think everybody knows I have a really huge grudge against Magic Duel. I made it very clear that I was not a fan of Trixie's return and how basically she came back for petty revenge, getting the Alicorn amulet to show up Twilight, and then turned Ponyville into her own version of the dictatorship. And on top of that, I really hated Fluttershy's character assassination and how she basically tries to run away for a coward. Like a coward. Especially when Ponyville is completely being jeopardized into turning into a dictatorship. I understand there are some reviewers that found the bits funny. I found it to be mean-spirited. And I hate it even more that when the rest of the main 6 after Twilight is banished, after they discover about the Alicorn amulet, they just straight up ignore Fluttershy and then try to get her to solve the problem. This whole episode really just angers me, and on top of that, Trixie's half-assed apology, yeah, I still do not care. I call it as it is. I think her apology to Twilight was completely half-assed, and as I said in All Bottled Up, her future appearances did not make me think that her apology was sincere, and that all the concerns that Twilight had about Trixie and No Second Prances were absolutely justified. Now, with all that being said, I am only putting us at number 20 because I know there are some people that can make arguments for this episode, and on top of that, Twilight being trained by Sakura and seeing how far her magic has grown since Season 1 to Season 3 was actually relatively good, and I did like the message on how Twilight had to rely on her friends to help get Trixie remove the Alicorn amulet. But aside from that, this episode basically falls into the I hate but everybody else likes category. It's not the worst, but I had to talk about it. Number 19, Feeling Pinky Keen. Oh boy, this episode. I really could not give a shit about the allegories about Twilight not believing in the Pinky sense and the whole you don't believe because you don't understand allegory for religion. Honestly, I really could give a shit. The main reason why I hate this episode was that Spike was mostly either an insufferable dumbass or a smuggish smartass. And this was back when I absolutely hated Spike in Season 1. I just want to be clear about that. Now, I will admit, the climax with the Hydra, I do find to be entertaining. And obviously, as I said, the one gag that did end up making me laugh was Twilight getting everything to drop out of the sky and fall on her and pretty much almost giving her a concussion were literally the only things I found funny about this episode. But aside from that, everything else was either a slog, stupid, or boring to get through. Not as bad as compared to when I reviewed this episode nearly 11 years ago, but I'm still not a huge fan of this episode. Number 18, Every Little Thing She Does. Honestly, as I said, this one hurts me a lot because this was actually one of the episodes I actually liked when I first watched it, but as on repeated watch-throughs and seeing more of its flaws, I started to hate it more and more. This is essentially the episode that gave a lot of viewers doubt about Starlight Glimmer's performance, and essentially she was going back to her old ways and using brainwashing to essentially get what she wants because she doesn't understand friendship. Like, really? Honestly, I literally had to skip through that entire second act when she actually does the thing, though I do acknowledge the fact that as the main six do call her out on this. But honestly, this was probably one of the few instances where her quote-unquote redemption was put into question. Thankfully, future episodes were able to put those questions to rest, but considering that we were with Starlight, now being part of the main cast with only 21 episodes by this point, it pretty much put her redemption into question. So that's something I cannot enjoy this episode for. Number 17, Daring Done. I freaking hate this episode. As I said, since Stranger Than Fan Fiction, this is where I started to think that the Daring Do episodes were start to suck. And Daring Done was the episode that made it personal because we had to give the stupid cliche of the whole freaking, Daring Do is now all of a sudden the villain because she causes collateral damage despite basically rescuing every single person under the sun time and time again. I literally hate the stupid cliche where all the side characters are all of a sudden gullible morons, and I really hate that trope so much, and I really want to see it die in a burning fire. Also, Cavalieron's plan was absolutely stupid when you think about it too much, and while I will give this episode that the action was somewhat exciting, which is the only reason why it's not any higher, I really do not like this episode. So yeah, I really can't say anything else about this episode, but yeah, this was probably another sign that the Daring Do episodes were starting to become garbage. Number 16, Some Pony to Watch Over Me. Honestly, the only episode from Season 4 that's actually on this list, and for relatively good reasons. This was the episode where I literally wanted to shake down on Applejack and make her realize that her sister is becoming a grown mare, let her take care of herself. But no, she has to become the absolute helicopter sister, and not having any trust in her sister and the thinking that she can actually take care of herself, and rather just continue to basically constantly baby her. And of course, the fucking ending of this episode, which is the climax of the Chimera. That would have been interesting, and it would have been a creative action scene if it wasn't for trying to hammer in the moral. And that ending, of course, where Applejack is not given any consequences, but Apple Bloom ends up facing consequences for running away, trying to do a job that Applejack was assigned to do. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. This was the only episode of Season 4 where I literally felt pure, concentrated rage. And especially at Applejack, where a lot of her episodes make me come into question about her character, and this episode was no exception. Number 15, Non-Compete Clause. AKA, what would happen if we did Involve with Her Friends, only shittier? I've already made it clear that, as I said, a non-compete clause is essentially a shittier version of Fall Weather Friends, where Applejack and Rainbow Dash are once again competing in each other in a Season 8 episode, mind you, where they're basically acting like they're Season 1 selves in Season 8's Coat of Paint. And obviously the thing I've mentioned in the actual review and the last time I talked about this episode is that the only other difference with their competition is that they didn't put innocent bystanders at risk, and you basically wanted to fast forward all the bickering just so you could get to the stupid moral at the end. That being said, the only reason why this episode is only number 15 and not any higher is because the Young Six were essentially the best part of the episode, because they constantly called out all the stupid bullshit. Number 14, Dragon Quest. Oh my god, I really don't know what else I could say that has already been said about this episode. Essentially, the episode is basically try to give us the expansive world about the dragons and learning where Spike is coming from, and basically the whole algorithm of the cliche dragon bullies being the masculinity of the crowd that sees, oh, friendship is magic, it's just for girls, blah, 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 blah. I get it. I really hated Garble and his dragon posse, and honestly, the fact that near the end of the episode, they were planning to murder a bunch of baby Phoenix eggs, and when Spike didn't want to do it, they threatened to murder him. And of course, with Rainbow Dash, Twilight, and Rarity showing up, what we could have gotten a cool action scene, they end up pulling a Monty Python the Holy Grail and just running away. Honestly, there's really nothing new I can say about Dragon Quest that hasn't already been said by many people in the fandom already. It is still a dumpster fire of an episode. However, the only reason why I'm not putting this episode any higher, in spite of how bad it is because I have personal vendettas with the other episodes on this list. Number 14. I already said number 14. That's how angry Dragon Quest makes me. Number 13. Owls Well That Ends Well. Honestly, this was really the episode where my hatred for Spike at the time was on full effect. Honestly, the whole stupid cliche jealousy story of him over Owlicious, a pet that was first introduced in this episode, and we have to go through the stupid cliche of Spike trying to do anything and everything under the sun to make himself look good in front of Twilight, only to make himself look like a total asshole. Honestly, I really could care less about what happens at the episode because the whole jealousy story pretty much is the center of the entire episode. It is not fun to watch, it is not endearing, and I really could not give a shit. Moving on. Number 12, Daring Doubt. The last Daring Do episode that was essentially one giant fuck you to every single person that actually cared about the Daring Do episodes. Fluttershy making herself to be literally the dumbest pony in Equestria, trusting what Cavallera of all ponies has to say and not trusting her friends, and of course the stupid contrived plot convenient truth-telling amulet to make Cavallera paint out the obvious of the stupid liar reveal trope, and then finding out that Aoi Zolo was a misunderstood bad guy when every single previous Daring Do episode that he was in said otherwise. Honestly, this was like the final time where I pretty much gave up on the Daring Do episodes because I knew they were essentially going to suck at this point. I really could give a shit about what happens, honestly, and I honestly will admit that I hate Daring Done more because there was a lot more things that got me angry, but I'm putting Daring Doubt higher than Daring Done because essentially of how much of the episode was just a spit into the face of the entire Daring Do lore. Moving on. Number 11, A Matter of Principles. As much as I want to put this episode higher, the top 10 are the episodes that really make my blood boil, but I am not going to ignore the fact that A Matter of Principles is one of Discord's worst episodes. The fact that the characters try to act like that is just Discord being Discord, Discord becoming a perpetual child and acting like a little shit who is not getting his way just because he's not put in charge of the friendship school. On top of that, he makes everyone's lives a living hell while putting students' lives at risk, sending the main six on a wild goose chase, and also putting Fluttershy in danger, and yet it is Starlight who was the one that has to apologize, and the stupid people in that comment saying that Starlight was the one that was in the wrong and that Discord was speaking facts. Get the fuck out of there with that bullshit. Don't even try that shit with me. He was being a little shit who was not getting his laid. Because I hate to break it to you guys, but kids need to learn the fact that bad actions leads to serious consequences. And if they don't get that message, they will not learn from their actions. And I have to keep hammering this home because some people think that Discord was actually in the right. Alright, now for the top 10. The episodes that ignite my anger to levels that you will not believe. But let's get into them. Number 10, Yakety Sax. The show's most ball-gratingly annoying episode. Basically, in the episode that showed what would happen if we made Pinkie Pie one of the worst characters in the entire show. The fact that she had to play the Uvitaphone, ruining her friends' lives and annoying everybody in town, and much like Discord in a matter of principles, when her friends tell her to stop, of which, by the way, they don't tell her the actual reason and dig into all the reasons why they want her to stop, she essentially becomes a brat, where she basically is not unhappy that she's not playing her favorite instrument and decides to throw a fit and run away to Yakistan. And then we get one final absolute slap in the face by the end, where not only does she manipulate her friends to play the Uvitaphone again, but the Yak saying that her playing is perfect, saying that you can still play at the same shitty level and don't have to improve in any form whatsoever. I really could not say what I've already said about this episode. I really am not a fan of it. Let's keep going. Number 9, Marks and Recreation. I am shocked that nobody else hates this episode. I feel like this is one of those episodes that this is another one of those episodes that I hate, but everyone else likes. And yet, I don't understand why it is actually liked in the first place. Honestly, I am going to criticize the Cutie Mark Crusaders for admittedly being narrow-minded about the whole concept of cutie marks, but at the same time, the fact that the show tries to address the whole topic of cutie marks and how they work, and yet they constantly talk about it through the entire episode and point out the problems, and I don't really need to mention anything about Rumble, who's essentially just as much of a narrow-minded brat who really thinks that cutie marks are all nothing but a bad thing, and basically uses every excuse to why he doesn't want to use a cutie mark, basically using it basically every excuse in the book of dumb excuses. And on top of that, the fact that he's like, I don't know, he tries to be like Isaac in Children of the Corn or the Tandy Computer Whiz Kids, where essentially he brainwashes all the young fillies who he's about cutie marks, including one who basically earned their cutie mark earlier in the episode. And even when the episode points out all the positives and how cutie marks work earlier in the episode, he doesn't care. Rumble single-handedly kills this entire episode. And by the end, when he does learn the positives about cutie marks, do I even care by this point? I literally want to give him a lot of spankings and slap him upside the head for being an uncomfortable brat and a moron. I'm sorry. I still think that Marks for Effort is the worst episode of Season 7, and you're not going to get me to change my mind. This episode tries to address the concepts of cutie marks, and the execution is total garbage. Number 8, The Mean Six. Basically, the episode that brought back Queen Chrysalis, and by the end, none of it mattered. I really hate this episode so much for how pointless this all was. The whole retreat thing was pointless, the story was pointless, the Mean Six were absolutely a waste of space for villains, and on top of that, by the end of the plan, literally nothing was accomplished. I still have no idea what the moral of the episode is, if it's supposed to have a moral. Well, the fact that the Mean Six are beaten via Deus Ex Machina by the Tree of Harmony, and Queen Chrysalis looks like probably the biggest dumbass in Equestria. That being said, as much as I hate this episode, you literally can actually skip this episode and not miss a goddamn thing. Number worst episode of Season 3 still to this day. This was probably back in the day where it was basically common to see a huge character one of these in our main characters, who we have started to grow and love. As I said, this was one of those episodes where my hatred for Spike at the time was on full blast. And even then, even like 10 years later, the episode is still utter garbage. As I said, much like in some other episodes at the time, to me, including in this episode, Spike either came off as an incredible dumbass or a smuggish smartass. And I hated both of them throughout the entire episode. The fact that he felt that he owed Applejack something and somehow does a shitty job at it astonishes me. He basically, much like what Rumble was in Marks for Recreation, Spike became one of the most insufferable characters in this episode. Even when a real Timberwolf ends up almost trying to eat Applejack, it literally just got to the point where I stopped caring. Honestly, I really could give a shit what the moral was because this episode angered me so much, and that is not the hallmark of a good episode. Number 6, Flutter Brother. As I said in the Season 6 list, I made a 45-minute review explaining why this episode sucks. I think you kind of notice the common trend with these episodes where it has one single character that ruins the entire experience, and that gives us Zephyr Breeze, one of the show's most insufferable characters, and yet somehow Hasbro decides to bring him back over and over again, whether it's the show's 200th episode or in a couple of Equestria Girls shorts. I literally felt nothing but disdain for Zephyr Breeze throughout the entirety of the episode, where I literally wanted to see anything happen to him. Get eaten by a Hydra, get stung by a Manticore, step on a Lego brick in the middle of the night, catch himself on fire, literally anything, because he is one of the most annoying characters in the entire show, where every time he was on screen, I want to punch him in the face. And the fact that the show tells us that he is smart and talented, but never shows it, and what they do show us is that he's essentially a con artist, a liar, a swindler, a manipulator, and every negative trait that is wrong with humanity. And I do not give him any sympathy. I give him apathy. And the fact that he quote-unquote learns main therapy, but then, as I said, by the 200th episode, he basically becomes one of Celestia's royal guards, meaning that everything he learned in this episode is null and void. This is essentially one of those reasons why Flutter Brother should not only be the worst episode of Season 6, but one of the worst episodes of the entire show, because after everything that comes down to it, he literally learns nothing. Let's move on. Number 5, The Mysterious Ne'er-do-well. I mean, do I honestly need to say what everybody else has already said about this episode? This was one of the show's first episodes where literally everybody in the fandom hated this episode. The constant superhero references being shoved in your face, Rainbow Dash's arrogance, and on top of that, it also didn't help the fact that the main 6 were also doing the same thing behind her back, and probably giving us one of the show's most hypocritical morals of all time. It is really, to this day, still an incredibly awful episode, and yet some people like the Fiery Joker defends this episode, to which I don't understand why. It is still a garbage episode to this day, and I really don't know what else to say because it is that terrible of an episode. Number 4, Bridal Gossip. Much like every little thing she does, this was an episode that I didn't mind at first, but this was an episode that I started to dislike more and more. And it actually got to the point where I actually ended up reviewing it twice. First time as a plain text review that I was doing back in high school to be like the nostalgia critic, and then having to do it again the second time as the text review, the first time as the actual review, but the voice of reason that pointed out all the problems with the episode. The inconsistencies in the animation, the poison joke being a contrived plot convenience that causes multiple plot holes, completely unlikable main 6, and of course, the underhandedness of the moral. I honestly don't need to say anything else that has already been said about this episode, because, quite frankly, there is nothing new to say about Bridal Gossip, and I hate it so much. I think you already know my top 3, because these are the 3 episodes that really anger me the most. Let's just get into them. Number 3, Princess Spike. This was the episode where basically I was slowly starting to come around on Spike after his huge growth of character development in Season 4 from Power Ponies, Inspiration Manifestation, and Equestria Games. This is the episode that made me go, yeah, never mind, I hate him again. Like, literally, the moment that Spike did the lock, shock, and barrel thing where he does the cross arms behind his back, I had lost all respect for him. While he did have good intentions at Stark, by the end of the episode, I literally wanted to see any other consequences fall on top of him. This was that episode where I literally lost any respect I had for him after Season 4. Because we're getting past this point, and I don't care that he's supposed to be a dragon and he's greedy, I literally felt like, what am I watching? On top of that, all the side characters were completely unlikable, including Fancy Pants, who was probably one of the few likable Canterlot citizens at the time, and it felt like that Spike didn't even learn his lesson, so it felt like I was watching Spike at Your Service all over again. And yet, as much as I hated Princess Spike, and I thought that there was no episode that was going to get worse after that, last 2 seasons gave us 2 of the show's worst episodes, and proved I was wrong. Number 2, Marks for Efforts. I am shocked that this episode isn't more hated than it should be. This was the episode where for the first time I actually literally had to post a rant on my Instagram because I hated this episode so much. The fact that the Cutie Mark Crusaders say fuck all about Miss Cheryl Lee's school and wanting to be a part of the Friendship School out of pettiness not only astonishes me, and while the show tried to give us some hints of foreshadowing with the advancements of the story of the introduction of Cozy Glow, which is another problem with this episode because unlike the Mean Six, this isn't an episode that you can skip. But the biggest crime that this episode commits is the character assassination of Twilight Sparkle. That third act where she accuses the Cutie Mark Crusaders to get Cozy Glow to fail on purpose, even when Twilight knows how the CMNC operate by this point, was on a friendship mission with them in Surf and/or Turf, and yet falsely accuses them without even hearing them out. I literally wanted to scream to the writers, what the hell is wrong with you? And then by the end of the episode, we're supposed to feel better when they do get accepted into the school, even though Twilight never even bothered to apologize to them, and basically says, oh, even though I falsely accused you guys for something you didn't even do, you get to still come here. Double fuck you up in the ass. I literally cannot say how much I hate that final third act. I literally hate every single fiber of my being on this episode. And honestly, this episode should have been number 1, and yet, the show's last season gives us an episode that is somehow worse. You already know what it is, so let's get it out of the way. And my number 1 worst episode of the entirety of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic is 246 Great. I can excuse some things. I can even be looking past some of the positives in Magic Duel. I am willing to brush aside some of the comedy in Spike at Your Service. I am even willing to look past the underhandedness of the morals of both the Mysterious Ne'er-Do-Well and Bridal Gossip. I would still be angry at it, but I would be willing to give a slight pass of Twilight's character assassination. But what makes this episode number 1 is that while All the other episodes on this list offended me on a story perspective. 246 Great hits number 1 because this is the only episode on this list that personally attacks me as a dancer. I don't even need to say anything about this episode. Rainbow Dash being quite possibly one of the show's worst characters in 9 seasons in just this one episode, and how she's acting like her season 1 self, constantly trying to ditch the cheer team just to be more supportive of the busball team, continues to half-ass her goddamn job until it's convenient enough for her, and then everybody calling her out on her bullshit, and Twilight feeling the need that Rainbow Dash needs to learn this lesson, even though the show has proven time and time again that Rainbow Dash knows how to hype up a crowd and has the ego the size of Asia, and basically tries to laugh off that final minute of saying, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about," when you did need to learn the moral. It was literally at that moment I threw my hands up and basically gave up, where I stopped caring. But what makes this episode number 1 is that I have made it clear that as someone who has only been able to dance throughout middle school, most of high school, and in college for only 3 years, this episode was a slap in the face for how it basically tries to handle and trying to be more supportive of cheer teams being treated as an actual sport. Well, if you're gonna do it, don't make it this shitty, because kids are probably gonna continue to insult cheer teams even more so. How this episode managed to do something that even the live-action Kim Possible movie also spat in the face of, by the way, yet somehow this episode does it even worse than that. This episode is number 1 for me because it is the only episode on this list that attacks me on a personal level, whereas every other episode on this list insults me on a story standpoint. It is really fitting how the show's final season just so happens to have the show's, in my opinion, the show's worst episode. And that is why I think 246 Great is hands down the worst episode in all of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. It is that abysmal. Alright, with all that out of the way, this list is done. That was a rough one, but we're finally at the home stretch. I think you know what next time is going to be, and then after that, this is pretty much the end of any content I have for Friendship is Magic. So next time, we're going to be looking more on the positive side of the spectrum as I count down the top 20 best episodes of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. See you guys next time. Bye.